When legendary adventure rider Gregory Fraser set out on his first ultimate two-wheeled trip around the world, there was only one bike that fit for the job: the iconic and seemingly indestructible Kawasaki KLR 650. From worldwide use by the Army and Marines, to offering cheap, reliable transportation and long-distance adventure riding, the KLR 650 is widely recognized as one of the most versatile and durable motorcycles ever produced. So before we go any further, I want to give a big shout out to the sponsor for this video, which is Control. Sponsors make this kind of thing possible and make, doing YouTube full-time possible. So again, thanks to them for sponsoring this video. If you guys are like me, sometimes you struggle to find time to make complicated meals. Sometimes you'd rather spend more time riding or working on your bike. In my case, I spend obviously a lot of time just working on videos. So instead of ordering unhealthy takeout meals, consider trying out Control. From their healthy, recently reformulated meal replacement shakes, which this strawberries and cream flavor tastes fantastic. And it has 23 grams of protein, it's loaded with vitamins and minerals, and it's made to keep you full. To these awesome protein snacks, these protein cookies are fantastic. If you guys want to try out Control, and we've got a deal for you guys, check out the Drink CTRL link that is in the description below. If you use code BART, you can get 10% off your first order. I'd recommend the bundle builder, which gets you even more percentage off, and you can also still use that code on top of it. Again, check out drinkctrl.com, which can be found in the description, and use code BART for 10% off. Alright, without further ado, let's jump back into the video. The 1980s was certainly an interesting and no doubt pivotal decade for motorcycle development. We saw the birth of the modern sport bike, leaps forward in performance and technology for really all classes of motorcycles, all sorts of new technology for the street and also for off-road bikes, and of course, the dawn of kind of the modern dual sport motorcycle, which would ultimately lead us into, the modern dad bike movement. This was a sort of new era in riding. Adventure touring was a relatively new term that people weren't really using, and the KLR 650 is part of a line of early motorcycles that would really bridge the gap between lighter, more off-road focused motorcycles and more touring capable bikes. Motorcycles that could be credited as the first dual sports weren't technically speaking the first of their kind. Dual sports trace their history all the way really back to the early days of riding when people started attaching high pipes and bash plates to their standard street bikes. Rather, these bikes from the 80s were just more purpose-built and comfortable and just better at the two-in-one nature of the job than the bikes that came before them. Of course, the BMW R80 GS really changed the entire landscape of motorcycles as we know it. That bike made its debut in 1980, and what followed was a whole slew of Japanese dual sports really made in the same vein, some more focused on off-road performance and others geared more towards touring. The KLR 650 was not Kawasaki's first dual sport. It wasn't even the first of their bikes to bear the name KLR. Prior to this model's introduction in 1987, Kawasaki's top-of-the-line big dual sport was the KLR 600, and it was a thoroughly modern bike for its time and for this class of motorcycles, at least on paper. In its class, it was supposed to be much more performance-oriented and technologically advanced than the average dual sport. It repped a 564cc liquid-cooled, 4-valve double overhead cam engine. Despite all of its features, testers found that this bike, well, it kinda sucked. Now, I know some of you out there love the KLR 600 and probably rode it and had a great time, so I'm not saying it's all around just a bad bike, but there was a reason why Kawasaki decided to go to the drawing board for 1987 and rework this platform. Their goal with this was not just another dual sport. No, this bike would be what they called a triple sport. Well, what does that mean? Aside from essentially being marketing BS, the idea was to build a bike that could comfortably handle both regular on- and off-road surfaces, like a typical dual sport, while adding speed and performance and really long-distance touring capability to the equation, hence the idea of, it being a triple sport. So dirt, street, and really highway. A sort of sport touring adventure bike. A true jack of all trades, and as we'll see, kind of a master of none. Now, I have to credit Big Rock Moto. His channel's really awesome. You guys can check it out. I have to credit him for pointing out this hilarious early promo for the KLR 650. It says, Kawasaki has broken the performance barrier, again, introducing the all-new KLR 650, a motorcycle that rules towns, twisties, and trails alike with record-setting 651 cc's of liquid-cooled 4-stroke power. That makes it the strongest thumper in its class, with a lot more power and torque than the 600cc crowd. Disc brakes front and rear deliver tremendous stopping power on and off the road. On the trail, on tour, or out on the town, triple your fun today with performance that goes beyond conventional boundaries. Ride the 1987 KLR 650. If you've never experienced a KLR, at first you might read this promo and think that the bike was some kind of multi-strata of its time. Here's the thing, guys. The KLR 650, whether then or now, was and is no Ducati multistrada. Unlike so many of Kawasaki's performance-based motorcycles through history, which truly did often live up to or even beyond their promotional hype, most of this talk surrounding the KLR was just smoke and mirrors. Yes, the KLR 650 was a step up from the rather unsuccessful KLR 600, but not because of some crazy level of technological sophistication. And despite all the talk of performance, the KLR was really a massive money maker for Kawasaki for about 3 decades for a few distinct reasons, none of them being really performance or sophistication. Let's talk about the KLR styling. I'm not going to sit here and tell you that KLR owners buy these bikes primarily for their looks, like say, retro bike owners. Though, like most motorcycles that have their own cult followings, this look does kind of grow on you over time. For the KLR styling, there's really no missing the inspiration. This was a bike meant to look like a Dakar race bike with its odd half fairing. Of course, other bikes would take this look even further, even from special edition KLRs to the Honda Africa Twin and the Dakar versions of the GS, to even today we see bikes like the Yamaha T7 and the Aprilia Touareg. This simple and somewhat ugly and really not entirely aerodynamic look would really stay along with the basic mechanics of the KLR all the way up until 2008, when Kawasaki would finally make their first major styling and performance update, though the bike really didn't get any prettier, and besides a major update to the brakes, most of the changes were to the bike's overall comfort and usability. At this point, the KLR stayed thoroughly within its own legendary tradition amidst major industry changes to all motorcycles, pretty much until the KLR would die in 2018 and then come back in full modern fuel injection form in 2022. The bike just pretty much stayed the same, and time will tell if that bike can carry on the legendary KLR status. Traditionalists speculate that it probably won't. The KLR 650 repped a 652cc liquid-cooled single-cylinder engine with that same double-head-over cam 4-valve setup that was on the 600. And that bump in displacement made for slightly more horsepower at a lower RPM, but more than anything, it meant about a 12% increase in torque at 500 RPM lower. It had a better carb and a better ignition setup, and it was electric start. Starting the big single on the older KLR 600 was a bit of a pain, but starting this bike was really a breeze. And the KLR was somewhat class-leading for 1987. Most of these dual sports at this time were kickstart only. I mean, even the DR650 wouldn't get electric start until about a decade after the KLR. More than anything, though, this engine was smooth, especially when you consider just how big of a single it is. Though much of the primary components of the 650 were different than the 600, the main components of the 600's chain-driven counterbalance system were kept for the 650, and this is how it was so smooth. This system utilizes 3 weights that are driven counter to the engine's rotation via chain, and this system really gave the big single significantly lower vibrations for more comfortable riding at higher RPMs. KLR owners have found lots of ways to reduce vibration even more, including switching to lighter aftermarket pistons. In the end, this lack of vibration on such a big torquey single made the KLR just a great bike pretty much everywhere. You were able to get the fun and the use of such a big single while having a really rideable bike for, again, being such a big single. And this DNA, is the same thing that's present in so many of KTM's bikes and what makes them so good. The goal with the chassis and suspension was really durability, specifically catered for off-road use, and that's why the KLR features long travel suspension with adjustable front forks and rear shock absorbers, allowing riders to fine-tune the bike's handling for various terrains. Though the chassis and suspension performed well in its day, the lack of changes over time amidst the competitive growing dual sport and adventure bike class, would quickly make the KLR dated in this regard. Again, I have to credit Big Rock Moto for showing how ridiculously soft the KLR suspension is, and that, along with the thin seat, helps bring down the 35-inch seat height so that regular-sized humans can ride this gargantuan motorcycle. Small single-disc brakes on the front and rear with single piston calibers meant that stopping the thing was somewhat of a task in and of itself. Perhaps the single best feature and a huge part of the KLR 650's popularity as really an all-arounder and as a touring bike is its massive gas tank. The KLR and the BMW R80 GS were ahead of their time in this regard. With its ridiculous 6.1 gallon tank, the KLR could easily carry you past 300 miles between fill-ups. And I love this notion. Make your bike stand out in a class where riders put down serious miles by simply giving it a gigantic gas tank. It's so simple, but it's genius. And again, this is a huge part of why so many people like adventure bikes. Yes, it makes the bike's proportions a little bit odd. You know, it's never going to win a beauty contest against something like my old Triumph. Plus the 21-inch wheel and 17-inch wheel on the back just kind of makes the proportions a little odd. But that's not the point. And that large gas tank was also one of the primary benefits for the American military, specifically the Marines and Army and even the Air Force, as they looked to develop a motorcycle platform for military use, based on the main components, but with a diesel engine to run on JP8 fuel, and really pretty much any fuel that's available, including kerosene, and also making quite a bit less power, but with an extended range of 600 miles and up to 130 miles per gallon. This is the M1030 M1, and it was developed by Hayes Diversified Technologies, and it was used by the American military for urban reconnaissance, convoy control, and military police functions. The smaller KLRs of the 80s had also been used by the military, so this bigger KLR was kind of a logical step. Now, above almost everything else, the price was really the most attractive part of the equation through the KLR's lifetime. It was a motorcycle that was pretty good at just about everything for very little money, and the KLR was consistently cheaper than the competition, and because of this, it became the bike of choice for those needing to do their two-wheeled adventuring on a bit of a budget. Also, having a bike that literally costs a fraction of the competition means that you don't care when you dump it in the dirt or, crack the plastic, and it means you're more likely to be willing to take it where, GS owners wouldn't dare go. And thus, in the end, you have more memories, you have more adventures, and you have more fun because you have a cheap bike. Now, the KLR was recently reborn in a more modern, emissions-passing form, and no doubt there are loads of riders out there on a new KLR, riding it for many of the same reasons that riders chose the KLR through its 30-year run prior to this new model. But for many riders, that old first and second generation KLR is really where it's at. If you've ever spent time perusing the classifieds for a KLR, you've probably seen that there are two main types of KLR riders and KLR bikes. There are those who leave the bike pretty stock, and they usually do less intense riding than Type 2. Type 2 is the group that really ride the bike, like a lot, and also ride it hard. And those riders have probably upgraded just about every aspect of the bike because that's what you have to do. From the seat to the foot pegs to the subframe bolts, also lots of zip ties. Those bikes feature things like faded plastic and cracked fork gaiters. In stock form, the KLR is really nothing special, but with the right upgrades and a bit of skill, you can literally eat up larger, heavier, more modern adventure bikes off-road. Because even though some people think of it as a heavy bike, by modern standards, it's really a light bike for, being a capable touring bike and a capable adventure bike. But what about this notion that the KLR is indestructible? The long-standing carbureted version of the bike really became a bit of a legend through its 30-year run, known for taking an absolute beating from its owners and surviving whatever you put it through. The truth is, there's no reason to believe that the parts that make up the KLR are any more durable or reliable than most motorcycles. Yes, this 650cc engine is great, and it really is super reliable, but it's not exactly the same as, say, a Honda Super Cub or a Goldwing. The engine can take a beating, yes, and you can rack up some serious miles for sure, but most of the bike was always pretty budget. No, the reliability of the KLR lies in its simplicity. In that sense, it's kind of like a Nokia phone, simple and tough and rugged. Kawasaki didn't technically make an indestructible motorcycle in the KLR. It's not and never has been the best in its class. Even upon its release, there really were better options. It's just always been incredibly affordable, and its primary value as a reliable motorcycle and as one of the primary options for those deciding to travel around the world has always been its simplicity. Riders find that with a bit of research and a lot of time with the bike, you really gain the know-how to keep the thing working or fix it when something stops working. This is also part of the reason why the KLR became the motorcycle of choice for the military. From the very first time a motorcycle was ever utilized in any way by any military, it was discovered that the best bikes are the ones that are simple to work on and can be repaired easily out on the field. Just like every other machine pretty much used by the military, they're really not interested in overly complicated tech that doesn't really serve a purpose. Rather, they want machines that can continuously just be fixed years and years and decades on. And there's really nothing simpler and more repairable than a single spark plug, single carb, single cylinder bike. Granted, I realized the engine in the military spec KLR was entirely different, but the point still remains the same because the bones of that bike is the same. A bike that isn't bogged down by loads of newer technology is actually a better bike for military use because it's a motorcycle that's easily understood with little need for specialized tools or parts or even special mechanical skills. It's the same reason for the success of the Harley WLA, again over many of the more technologically advanced bikes that were available during World War II. That bike too was a simple, reliable motorcycle that could be maintained with ease, and that's exactly what the KLR is. Now, all of this may be true. It doesn't necessarily equate, though, to a massively popular motorcycle. See, there's another aspect of the KLR that doesn't always get mentioned, but it's right there. From the strange noise in the exhaust note to the trusty zip ties and the Loctite that can apparently be used to fix just about anything wrong with this bike. This is a motorcycle that has character, and it kept that character as the rest of the industry moved away from carburation to fuel injection, and this class of motorcycles in particular became filled with the most expensive, tech-heavy stuff that you can have on a motorcycle, and as motorcycles became more and more difficult for average idiots like you and me to work on, the KLR just kind of kept trucking along unchanged. Yeah, you might have more crap to deal with, including gummed-up carbs, but who cares? In the end, you probably have a lot more fun, and you feel more connected, and even more confident in your cheap, ugly, crappy mule of a motorcycle, and in my opinion, that's what having a motorcycle that's full of character is all about. KLRs, especially ones that have had a life, they have personality, and I really think that's a big part of the charm and the appeal. And as someone who believes that motorcycles truly can be more than the sum of their parts, and that we as riders can develop a special connection with these machines without needing to spend an arm and a leg, I think it's all pretty cool. Now, I wanted to reach out to a KLR owner and, somebody who's really passionate about these bikes to just get their perspective on this whole thing and what these bikes are really all about. So this is what I was told from a guy who also helped me out on the Katana video I did a while back. He said there's an aspect about the KLR 650 that I think KLR owners will always look at reviewers a bit cockeyed when they talk about the KLR 650 being average or heavy jack of all trades or will get you there. It's more like diehard KLR 650 owners. They're more like hipster drug addicts who stopped chasing the paradoxical dragon of motorcycle consumerism and insecurities of authenticity, and we don't want anything else. He said, as you know, I'm a Suzuki Katana respecter, but I've never owned a Suzuki Katana. I have owned 4 different KLR 650s, and I currently own 2, in addition to a Ducati Street Fighter V2 and a Honda CRF 300L. The KLR is my favorite bike. My first adventure bike was a 2021 BMW R1250 GSA. Phenomenal machine. I took it in really hairy off-roading as a total amateur and basically held on like a bull in a china shop as its Titanic space magic kept it vertical as it went effortlessly through muddy single track in Appalachia and deflected off rocks and ruts without issue and plowed ahead. There was a point where I almost lost my bike through the surface of a falling apart abandoned bridge over a river, And while my friend with his DR650 may have been gutted if he lost his dual sport, my $26,000 GSA would have been a financial catastrophe. I don't think my insurance would cover such an incident. I found a good deal on a 1987 KLR 650, a year one, in New Mexico, and I flew to New Mexico and purchased it. It was my first KLR. I just thought it was a cool, cheap bike, and I fell in love with that bike. I never did with my BMW. Let me explain. I was riding my BMW at like 120 miles per hour on the freeway and was caught out in a Midwestern summer thunderstorm, extremely heavy rain and wind. There was hardly any sensation of this at all. The bike never had any difficulty. I didn't have to adjust anything. I didn't even change the drive mode to rain mode. I didn't perceive any difference. In fact, aside from my forearms, I didn't even get wet until I came to a stop. My KLR 650, which had all kinds of problems when I purchased it, that I slowly fixed with the help of a friend, was not like this. In fact, I felt like I was riding a bomb. When I was caught in the rain on my KLR 650 on the highway, when I first got it and it had leaky forks and weird noises from the engine, I felt like I was riding a bomb. The brakes felt like rubbing two pizza boxes together. I felt like a pirate sitting on top of a cannon. I was totally soaked. It felt dangerous. I was in love with motorcycling like I never had been before. I traded in my 2021 BMW R1250 GSA for a 2022 KLR 650 because I wanted a new fuel-injected one for winter commuting and not having to deal with a carburetor. I also bought a 1999 one from Eastern Pennsylvania and rode it back to Ohio on the Lincoln Highway. My buddy that I went dual sporting with, who had the DR650, now has a Yamaha Tenere 700. I still prefer my KLR. It is way more comfy, way more simple, bigger fuel tank, and will go anywhere I point it. I've dropped my KLR tons of times off-road, and I suck off-road, whereas I never dropped my BMW once. The KLR 650 isn't a perfect bike. I maybe would have liked a 6th gear or maybe 10 more horsepower or 30 fewer pounds, but it really doesn't matter. It's the best bike at just being a bike to live with, to go anywhere with, to have no pretense with, to not feel like you are seeing the landscape of our country pass you from behind a glass. It's probably what our ancestors thought of crossing this continent on dirt roads, on old Harleys and Indians, and before them, horses maybe. I don't know, it's just such an honest bike that allows you to feel free without expectations, without pretense, without worry. Without idealized fantasies about motorcycling from the internet interfering with just putting your butt in the saddle and going somewhere. And you feel the experience. You experience the environment, the discomfort, like you're actually enduring something to go long distance across the landscape. I think the BMW R1250 GSA is a great machine if you want to cross a continent with as little fatigue and risk as possible and have plenty of power and comfort doing it, but that's why I drive a Lexus. So I hope you guys found that perspective helpful. I'm sure a lot of you KLR guys will agree with that. If you have or continue to own a KLR 650, let us know your stories down below in the comments, as we love to hear them. And yeah, we'll see you guys in the next one. Ride safe.